Hi, Rubina, we can begin now.
All right. Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for being here. Welcome. Um, Firstly, good morning, good afternoon, and a very good evening to everybody. Thank you so much to all of you for joining from your part of the world. Ours is, of course, in the evening, and for a lot of you, it's very early in the morning. So thank you very, very much for your time. So we had a short hiatus in July, but we are back with our webinar series, and this is the fourth webinar in our Restore Her Rights webinar series. So in our previous webinars, we sort of set the tone for what this initiative is about, and we also
Excuse me,
spoke
sorry,
about,
Rubina. Sorry,
sorry,
sorry. Very sorry to interrupt. We cannot see your screen. It's black.
oh, really?
Yeah.
Give me a minute. Can you see
Yes, if you could
now?
go screen now.
Okay.
Yes, perfect.
Okay. Can you see now? Okay, great. So where was I? So yeah, in our previous webinars, of course, Shruti set the scene for, what the initiative was about. And we also spoke about, different case studies and different examples and also we spoke about stories and experiences from the field, right? So now we're taking a more technical aspect and we're talking about mapping gender in restoration and conservation, right? And why it is important in for mapping, to map gender for restoration or any conservation activities in biodiversity, um, for it to be gender responsive. So why is it important in gender restoration initiatives? Let's talk about it today. To speak on this, we have four wonderful experts here with us who will speak on the significance of mapping gender in biodiversity conservation and restoration. They'll be speaking about frameworks that are pertinent to collecting data that will help us understand gendered patterns, gaps, and inequalities and equities. So they will be sharing their work and their own experiences in this regard. Now, before we move forward, let's go over some ground rules. Um, Considering our speakers and their time who are here, and to respect them and to listen to their insights, we request all of you to kindly keep your microphones off for the duration of their discussion. Of course, our mode of delivery is in English, but we have live interpretation in Spanish and in French. So please use the interpretation globe icon at the bottom of your screen and kindly change it to whichever language you're comfortable with and you'd want to listen in. This session is also being live streamed on YouTube so that it'll be available for anybody who has not been able to attend today. They can also be used for further dissemination. So please feel free to share this, discussion here today, especially for those who wanted to be here but could not attend, unfortunately. Finally, we have our question and answer session. And for this, we have our question and answer box. So if anybody has a question, when our panelists are speaking and discussing and showcasing their presentations, you can simply drop us a question on the box and we'll address it once the presentations are over. And finally, we would love to hear from you all, where you are from, what you do. So please use the chat box to introduce yourselves. And it's a really great way to, sort of catch up as well. So yeah, I think, without further ado, I would just like to now talk a little bit about the initiative. I'm sure we all know something about the Restore Her Rights initiative. Um, but this initiative is basically guided uh, with the sole notion of advocating for women-led and community-led restoration practices and work that's been going on in the ground and basically amplifying voices that are not heard before, right? There's so much work being done on the ground, but there's the space to showcase them is again, it's difficult, right? So Women for Biodiversity has been working with a lot of women, with a lot of Indigenous peoples and communities to sort of amplify their voices, not just on a local scale, but at a national and hopefully in a global scale as well. And this is, of course, guided by four objectives. So one is to promote rights, to advocate for policies, more inclusive policies and programs, of course, and initiatives that help to restore access, for land tenures, for land rights, and of course, in various restoration and conservation initiatives. It's also to celebrate the work that has been done on the ground, because a lot of the times it doesn't reach to a larger audience. So how can we highlight and amplify their voices to drive more social, cultural, and economic progress? It's also to build more collaborative efforts in restoration and conservation spaces. It's a space for learning, dialogue, exchange of knowledge cross-culturally. So yeah, and even locally as well, a lot of the times. And finally, for empowerment, right? We hope to provide at least spaces for learning, and, through basically capacity building or through workshops, of course, by providing tools. So yeah, these are the four objectives that guides our initiative. And the most important bit is our components. So it's made up of four components. The first is advocacy hub, right? So how do we take forward all of this work? By basically advocating, right? Through campaigns and through collaborative partnerships with our partners, with our our communities, and of course people who are working on the ground, and also by storytelling, by making sure that their work is being amplified through various mediums. Like, written work is not the only way to tell your story, right? There's other ways through digital and social media, and very vivid social visual storytelling can happen as well. So that's another way. Of course, it's also a way to share knowledge through, exchange platforms. It's a forum for discussions. It's a safe space to come up with ideas, to, of course, discuss methods, tools, of course, and also, traditional knowledge and practices. And finally, I think most important component is that Women for Biodiversity, we want to establish a learning resource center where if people want any sort of resource or any sort of toolkit or guidebook, they can come here and they can sort of access this, right? And so this can be done through workshops, through webinars like what we're doing right now, and of course through trainings, etc. So these are our core components, and this is what, of course, drives us to go, to sort of keep this movement going. And finally, we come to our speakers. Let me quickly introduce you to our speakers today. So first we have for our keynote speaker, Ms. Marion Marigo. She's the Senior Advisor at Nature Hub at the United Nations Development Program, and she has successfully designed and implemented spatial planning activities by engaging national level stakeholders, right? And amazingly, she's also leading the Prioritizing Nature project in 3 countries in Colombia, Peru, and Ecuador. Then we have our expert, Ms. Marlene Elias, our gender lead at Alliance of Biodiversity International and the International Center for Tropical Agriculture. Her incredible body of work focuses on gender dimensions of forest management and restoration, gender norms in agri-food systems, forest, agriculture, food value chains, and women's resources rights. And she looks at these issues through a feminist political ecology lens. And she works predominantly in West Africa and South and Southeast Asia, Central Asia, apologies. Then we have Ms. Cindy Giulianti. Welcome. She's the advocacy coordinator of the 𝗙cie𝗶𝗹 Consortium Southeast Asia and the program manager of the working group of ICCAs in Indonesia. And she is an environmental justice activist, and she participates in international policy negotiations to bridge local and global advocacy efforts. And finally, for our closing, we have Ms. Rachel McMonagall, Rachel McMonagall. Sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong. And she's the Climate Change Program Director at 𝗀𝗍𝗱, and she promotes secure land tenure as a driver for poverty reduction and climate change and mitigation adaptation. So these are our speakers, and without further ado, I would like to present this floor to Ms. Marion for her keynote speech. Sumina, is Ms. Marion available? Thank you very much, everyone.
No, Marion is not here right now. Maybe we can just move ahead with the agenda, Ravina.
Okay, so because Ms. Marion is not here today, let's move ahead with perhaps Marlene. Would you like to take the stage and sort of set the tone for, what mapping gender is all about and why it is so significant? So yeah, let's move on. Thank you very much. Marlene, on to you.
Sure. Hello. Thank you so much. I'm just trying to share my screen here. You can give me a moment. And please confirm that you see the slides in a mode that makes sense.
We
You
don't
see them now? No? Okay, let me try again. Apologies for that. You cannot start screen share while the other participant is sharing, is what I'm getting. So maybe.
Oh, I stopped sharing. Hold on. Let me just.
Okay, I'll try again then. Maybe you stopped after I tried. Sharing, just a moment. Okay, I think I am screen sharing now.
Yes.
Yes.
Great. And am I in the proper mode for that? Or are you still seeing? Here we go. How about this?
Oh, yeah. Works now.
Yeah. Okay, great. Well, thank you so much. And thanks for inviting me to be here. It's a real pleasure to have this opportunity to share my work in this excellent initiative. So yeah, I'll share work that I've been doing over the past few years with colleagues on gender and restoration. And what I'm sharing here is work that's been intentionally done to influence restorationists and practitioners who are from governments, research organizations, environment, development organizations, who are contributing to restoration initiatives, often mostly familiar with biophysical aspects of restoration. And so the idea is to support them in their understanding, in their work, that restoration is about trees, it's about biodiversity and soils and climate and all of that, ecosystems, but it's also very centrally at its core, it's about people. So it's about the men and the women who manage these ecosystems and whose lives and livelihoods are intimately tied to the landscape and to the landscapes that are being restored and who stand to benefit the most from restoration or to lose from restoration. So I've put this here on forest landscape restoration, the definition as a planned process that aims to regain ecological integrity and enhance human well-being in deforested and degraded landscapes. Just to flag that forest landscape restoration, but other types of restoration as well, mainly do usually state as intended aims to advance both human well-being and ecological well-being or environmental health. So there is already some kind of recognition that livelihoods are important in restoration. Some even recognize on paper often that restoration can offer opportunities to advance gender equality, to advance women's rights, to advance women's livelihoods. But we've seen over the years that these goals have to be intentionally pursued rather than assumed. So they're not going to be automatically achieved through restoration unless there are some specific measures and efforts made in that regard. So to support practitioners then in achieving these goals, colleagues and I have developed several frameworks to help them identify where or how gender matters in restoration. And we've gathered and analyzed data to identify where there are gaps and also where there are opportunities to advance gender equality through restoration. So I just want to start today by sharing a couple of those frameworks, and then I'll share one example of data that we've collected that brings visibility to gender inequalities in restoration and that can be used to help identify entry points then for change. So this is a first framework. It sheds light on 4 components. It highlights some of the risks that initiatives run if they don't consider and carefully address these components. So what's highlighted here, you can see here on the upper right-hand side how gender affects perceptions and priorities related to what to restore, where, and how, based on gender differentiated experiences, which implies that different voices and different knowledge holders need to be heard in restoration initiatives and that their priorities need to be considered. The second one here is around costs and benefits related to restoration. So the need to establish equitable systems of benefit sharing to reduce rather than accentuate what might be already existing inequalities in access to resources and to benefits. And if you move to the bottom left here, we've got a component related to time use and women's workloads. And this is really to recognize that, you know, women make important contributions to restoration, but they also have heavy workloads. So to make sure that projects don't exacerbate their workloads, and not assume that women have all this free time or can contribute for free to these initiatives. And the fourth point here on the upper left is around the issues of women's rights to land, the fact that insecure tenure or lack of land rights to women's land rights pose barriers to their restoration activities and to their ability to receive benefits from those activities. And also that initiatives can result in women actually losing access to lands that they used if tenure issues are not considered carefully. So these are all components that we flag here as being important to be accounted for when planning and implementing restoration projects. And again, this is meant to be very practical guidance for restorationists who, as I mentioned, may not be very familiar with the human or social aspects of restoration. So it's meant to be accessible, and that includes in this case then why we're framing gender here as a binary. So the language here is really about women and men, but if you read on in the actual guidance, you can see that it does recognize the diversity of women, the diversity of men, and of their experiences. So the need to consider intersectionality, whether it's how gender intersects with socioeconomic status, ethnicity, caste, marital status, and more, and also that gender is not a binary. So another framework here that builds on or includes many of the same components as what we've just seen, components related to equal opportunities through restoration. And here this framework more clearly states the need for equitable participation for women and men to have an equal say in matters related to restoration, and for both to have a say in matters related to restoration. So we know that anyway, communities are not always centered in these projects to begin with. So there's a gender dimension and there's a broader inclusion dimension as well, ensuring that women and men have a say, grassroots women and men, over the matters that affect their lives and their lands. There's also another component here, which we pull out more prominently around safeguards. So ensuring that there's free, prior, and informed consent of women and men in communities, establishing adequate compensation, grievance mechanisms in case of unintended negative consequences of projects on women and men in communities. So there are many ways to bring visibility to key issues related to gender and restoration. A lot of guidance exists for practitioners. These are just two cuts on this, but there's a lot more out there. Many resources by Women for Biodiversity, which I'm sure are on the resource center that Rubina mentioned earlier on the website. So, you can have a look at those as well. But a few years ago, then colleagues and I actually did a review of guidance and I put together a kind of guide to guides because there was starting to be more and more guidance on this topic, and we tried to organize it in yet another framework, which you can see here. But basically, I point this out because if you do want to have access, you do want to have a look at a resource that compiles several others, this can be this is a bit of a useful one for, again, gender, seeing what are very practical strategies and tactics for enhancing gender equity in restoration initiatives. So, turning to data, now the role of data. I mean, these frameworks are there to help us guide our thinking and also our data analysis, our information gathering activities, and to be able to find, using these frameworks, where there are indeed gaps and entry points for enhancing equity and restoration initiatives. So we did that a few years ago. We worked in 3 countries. That's what I'm sharing this one study with you now. We've been working on several others, but this is working in Cameroon, Peru, and the Philippines, and in many projects across those 3 countries, 17 in total across the countries. And we looked at how gender equitable restoration initiatives that were already ongoing were. So we organized our analysis around a social justice framework to understand to what extent women were recognized as legitimate stakeholders in restoration projects, whether they had equal voice and were able to participate actively in projects and their important decisions, and whether the costs and the benefits of the projects were equitably distributed among women and men in participating communities. So we spoke to women from those communities and to men in those communities through focus group discussions. We also interviewed key informants from the communities. We spoke to project staff. And you can see here the figure on the right-hand side that sums up some of the key points of the findings. So from a recognition perspective, we identified the factors that affected who was recognized as legitimate stakeholders in these initiatives, who was invited then to be part of the projects. And that included, that was shaped by factors such as gender. So being a man was was what led to inclusion, and age, being also a member of formal associations, having secure land rights, were all factors shaping who was perceived as legitimate stakeholders. In terms of who could have a say in the project and its decisions, the factors that mattered were the gender division of labor, which gives women heavy household responsibilities and means that often they were unable to even attend meetings related to projects. There were gender norms and cultural expectations that made it difficult for them to speak up when they were at the meetings and to have a voice in the decisions being made. Women also expressed, a lack of experience occupying leadership roles or playing leadership roles in mixed gender situations, elite capture of decision-making processes, and so on, that led to their exclusion from decision-making. And in terms of the distribution of costs and benefits, you can see here many of the same factors as those that shaped access to other aspects of justice in the project, like land tenure. And land tenure is really transversal and comes up again and again, of course, when it comes to equity in restoration. But you can see other factors here as well, like early entry into the project, which was really determining in terms of, or determined very much who could then access benefits for the whole entire duration of the project. So I'm showing you these qualitative results in aggregate, but when the results of the project were brought back to the individual projects, those results from those projects, it was possible for the teams to make more intentional efforts to include women in the projects and to create enabling conditions or terms that would enable them to participate more equitably to rectify some of those inequalities. So my point here is, knowing the main barriers in specific contexts. It's very, very important, of course, to make appropriate decisions and identify appropriate strategies to create equitable initiatives. And of course, things change along the way. So needing to keep your finger on the pulse along the way through monitoring, continuing to gather data along the way, to analyze it carefully, to make sure that it feeds back into these projects or initiatives is very important. To think also of what might be a negative unintended consequences of these projects, and to adjust the direction of travel as needed. And in that, just a final plug for mixed methods being very important, interdisciplinary research here, and of course the involvement, central active engagement of local communities in these processes being so important to be able to gather data, identify the key issues that are related to their lives. These, what is a complex issue related to people's lives and environments. So here are the resources I mentioned, and I will stop here, but hopefully some of these can be useful for you if you're trying to engage in in a restoration initiative or trying to help others perhaps who are a little bit less familiar with these dimensions. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Marlene. Thank you very much for this wonderful presentation. And if we have any questions, please put them in the question and answer box down below, and we'll address them in the question and answer round. For our next presentation, I think we have, I know we have Cindy, and I'd like to pass the floor on to her, please. Yeah, thank you very much. Cindy, please take it away.
Yeah, thank you, Rubina, for giving us the chance to share our experience and work on gender mapping. But I would not maybe talking on restoration perspective, but our experience really on supporting and promoting the indigenous peoples and local community conserved territories and area or 𝗙cie𝗋𝗋. So mostly it's an angle of conservation, area-based conservations, yeah. So I'll share a screen. If you can see my screen, just let me know. Can you see the screen? Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah, I would like to share, I think, a study case from my country, Indonesia, in supporting indigenous peoples and local community conserved territories and areas, or 𝗙cie𝗋𝗋s. And we create kind of tools to do documentations and also documentations and kind of creating a platform of national registry to increase feasibility of traditional knowledge and indigenous peoples local communities contribution and conservations and focusing on the area based conservations. So here I might just share you a little bit of our stories in Indonesia on indigenous peoples and conservations. We know that Indonesia is, an archipelagic countries, is pretty huge with the diverse ecosystem, with the diverse culture and indigenous peoples, particularly women. Here, they have so many practices of traditional knowledge-based conservation in Indonesia. They have, diverse name on it, like 𝗀𝗙cie𝗋𝗶𝗹 and Tanah Ulen and Alas Bertajati, and some of them are even very specific, utilized and protected by women itself. And but in the other side, we also see the fact that we have a very lack informations and documentations about the relation between communities, including the gender disaggregations data that can showing about the role and also contribution of each groups, especially those who might be unseen. And this gender disaggregation data would be very important for the community to see again, the situational condition in their landscape, in their 𝗙cie𝗋𝗋s. And it's gonna be very important also for the policy processes, policy making processes. And here in Indonesia, if we can say that there's not a specific gender responsive policies in our conservation law, and this is something that also feel a little bit disappointed because to be honest, we know that the global biodiversity framework has been enabling gender plan of actions. It was a very responsive gender-based policy, but it's really hard to interpreting the gender plan of action and also gender-based policy and general conservation policies in Indonesia. So and in the other side, because we know that there are kind of colonializations of knowledge, and we're having this decolonizing of knowledge movement in Indonesia by having biggest movement, I think, on participatory mapping to have a counter mapping movement that has been started in 1990s. So many groups like indigenous peoples, local community, they do kind of massive participatory mapping to counter the map given by the government with a very colonial perspectives. So this is, I think, the start where the approach of 𝗀cie is also kind of adopting this participatory mapping to really see again the perspective of the community with their land, with their natural sources, and including how we can see the intersectionality of gender and women here on that on their own territories and natural sources. If you can see here, we create kind of national registry system to collect this 𝗀cie𝗋𝗋's areas, and we call it as a guideline to national registry guideline of the 𝗀cie𝗋𝗋. So we create a guideline that can be used participatively by the communities to self-documenting their 𝗀cie𝗋𝗋's, their territories. And they also kind of we also provide kind of platform, like digital platform to to compile and to aggregating the datas that they have been collected by the communities, and to be able to be not access, but actually to be what is it, to be linked with the policy making processes itself. And we actually making also a process of documentation from a very first grassroots processes until we do a verification, and we also create kind of protocol to share the database with the decision makers. Here, if I can say, this is kind of stages or like the flow of the national registries. And when we talk here about participatory mapping, or how exactly participations look like, is that participations here, we mean that the center of the data collection, the center of the documentation is really on Indigenous peoples, local community, or the rights holders, the people who live with the territories, particularly a woman, as the centers of the 𝗀cie𝗋𝗋 registrations. And community themselves, they conduct social, they kind of collecting their social data, such as their ecological practices, history, governance, customary law, spatial data. So we here in the secretariat of working group 𝗀cie Indonesia, we only kind of assisting them to like understanding the model, understanding the guidelines, but the processes is really led by them itself, and also our local partners in each regions, so they can identify their value, aspiration. And it's very important because from these processes, they can create kind of diving, they can dive into deeper collections of their knowledge, including do such a power mapping analysis in the community, and trying to deep into the intersectionality point, and also do such a need assessment in the community, what exactly they need, their aspiration, hopes, and the next steps. So from our experience, by having this documentation processes, like the community themselves, they can rethinking and they can refinding their own identities, because there has been so many fact that there are so many traditional knowledge, or women-based traditional knowledge are disappeared due to so many, we actually know that there are so many threats. It's not only about the colonial perspective about education system, but also destructive destructive development that they face, and it's really affecting their knowledge in the communities. So it can, through this participatory processes of documentations, they can have a deep and holistic evidence base about women's contributions and roles in 𝗀cie, and how actually policy processes need to acknowledge such initiative. And we ensure also FPIC processes, and also self-assessment of the community, even the peer review itself. Peer review, it means that there's kind of participatory verification process of the 𝗀cie, where each community in many places, they can take a look at each other, and they can do such a co-recognition, because we know, I think, in the context of tenure rights, in the context of tenure of the conservation, community-led conservations, there are so many obstacles on how actually government can admit and can recognize peoples or indigenous peoples, local communities, women's contribution in conservation itself. So we cannot only rely on a formal recognition of the government, but we also need to create kind of peer review and co-recognition processes from other community that, yeah, we have these contributions and we're recognizing each other's, and it creates more, solidarity. It creates more confidence of the community to go forward, not only for the policy processes, but also for their self-empowerment. So this is, kind of little sparks of how the peer review look like in the community. On they do their own delineation process, self-collections of their social informations and regarding on conservation and governance. So from that process, we kind of collecting this, as I said, as in the platform, and until now we able to kind of aggregating and register 647 thousand hectares of the 𝗙cie𝗋𝗋, and we even can able to see a bigger potential of the 𝗙cie𝗋𝗋 reach 23 million hectares. And the most importantly, by this primary data, we can also do further analysis to see kind of holistic pictures of the 𝗙cie𝗋𝗋s or community-led conservations or traditional knowledge-based conservations in the community. And we kind of observe that there are so many wide variety of 𝗙cie𝗋𝗋 practices in the community. So the 𝗙cie𝗋𝗋 or the area is not only protected by the community, but it's also even contribute to their economic development and their sustainability. And from here, if we can see in the picture, there are some study case here, like which one actually the 𝗙cie𝗋𝗋 that restricted by the community to be accessed by other people or external actors, like very protected by the community. Like here, we found in Sulawesi, like 𝗀𝗃𝗃, Pangale, and also our Alas Mertajata is kind of sacred area of the community, and which one is utilized by the community in subsistent way, you know what I mean? So it's also contribute a very local economic approach of the communities itself. So from this we can see that there are so many variety of community practices, but in the other side also seeing deeply in other deep research about woman contribution in these 𝗙cie𝗋𝗋 practices. And the last is, I think, from these processes, we kind of find that 𝗙cie𝗋𝗋 documentations and register processes can be a good tool actually to see relationship between women and biodiversity in territories. And the intersectionality also should be ensured in the process of documentation and participatory mapping processes. And we also should enhance and increase documentation as an evidence base, because if we have to see the fact that there are not many research showing women's and biodiversity relations. And the fourth itself, in the context of policy making, is that I think we cannot talk about policy if we are not coming from the grassroots data, from the communities data itself. So in the context of policy processes, if we collect this through this tool like 𝗙cie𝗋𝗋, I think that's also would be very useful, at least from the community in the grassroots level, to like see priorities itself, and also how actually women need more space to be acknowledged in the policy making, especially to answer their need in their territories itself. So I think that's for me on my presentations. I hope we can discuss it further. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cindy, and thank you for taking us, throughout through your presentation, how data and documentation sort of helps, in policy negotiations, and of course, in recognizing the value of doing peer review and of course recognizing each other's work rather than just waiting for national and international governments to actually recognize our work, right? So that's really fascinating. Thank you so much. We have a few questions from our participants. The first question is from Gia. Hi Gia, thank you so much for your question. So her is, I think, more general. Is it targeted towards anyone? Let me know. But Gia asks, do you all work with rural women, and do you have anyone from Trinidad and Tobago? So yeah, I think is this for the speakers, Gia, or is this for everyone? I think that is for all of us. But apart from that, I think Rachel has a question for Cindy. Thank you so much, Rachel, for your question. Cindy, how do you address intellectual property issues regarding sharing traditional knowledge? It seems challenging to balance the benefits of sharing IP expertise while also respecting cultural sensitivity of traditional knowledge. Cindy, you want to take that away?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I just maybe can answer by my experience here in Indonesia. Like, to be honest, I think it's very hard to grounding the access and benefit sharing issues in the concrete policy product. Yeah, like here in Indonesia, we have a policy on intellectual property rights, including recognitions of the rights holders or the knowledge holders itself. But if we take a look into the policy itself, there's no such a kind of article or regulations that that create a mechanism to get the benefit from the use of the genetic resources of the biodiversity itself. And I think here, India, if I'm not mistaken, they have a concrete example how they thrive on their access and benefit sharing, and also they really advance in like creating mechanism of the access and benefit sharing. Maybe if there's someone participant here from India, you can share maybe on that perspective. But I think in my experience, there's no kind of concrete example of how access and benefit sharing is really implemented here in Indonesia. I think that's my answer. I can answer. Thank you.
I think before I go to Gia, I know you have your hand raised, Gia. I think Marlon can sort of provide us with an example of maybe her experience in South Asia, right? So do you have like any examples, Marlon, of access and benefit sharing mechanisms that was used maybe in your research? Would you like to answer that?
I don't have a great example. So I think maybe we can maybe someone in the
Audience.
in the chat in the audience has something they would like to share. But we also, I mean, that is obviously a big question that is, I think many there's a tension around that for sure, and it's very, very important. Yeah, thank you.
Maybe
Thanks,
just
Marlon.
add a little bit, Robina. I think based in our our network experience, mostly we come up with an idea on community protocols. It's really on how community themselves they can prevent a biopiracy on traditional knowledge and genetic resources, particularly maybe not specific on genetic resources, but at least biodiversities and species one. So it's really kind of a policies create in the local context to like prevent this biopiracy and avoiding illegal access to their natural resources and biodiversity. I think that is something that also addressed in the Protocol of Nagoya, but we know that the CBD context, we have been moving forward talking about DSI, so that's why 𝗙liche Fund is there, but we're still kind of figuring out how exactly that would be look like in the context of access and benefit sharing.
Not in terms of biopiracy, but maybe Sumina or Tina can sort of join in and then they can correct me, right? But I think in one of our own sort of the case studies that Women for Biodiversity sort of supported, I think it was in maybe Solomon Islands or maybe in Myanmar. I think what happened was they started giving training, like ranger trainings, right, in certain parts of the forest or in the community. So that sort of helped in basically collaborating in such a way and creating partnerships in such a way that sort of curbed illegal illegal poaching, illegal trade of like goods and, biopiracy. So that sort of might be something that one of those mechanisms could be really useful, something that's not very complicated, but at the same time would require a bit of capacity building and training and getting the community together, right? So that might be one. But yes, Gia, you have your hand raised and I have a few other questions. But yeah, Gia, you want to take it away?
Yes, thank you very much. Good morning and good night or good afternoon. I'm not sure. We are in the Caribbean, in Trinidad and Tobago, to be exact. Your question to me was whether or not we were asking the question, who we were asking the question of, and I think that my question specifically dealt with the organization, whether or not you all are operating in the Caribbean or in Trinidad and Tobago. Do you have someone here in Trinidad and Tobago that we can reach out to? We are, as I indicated, a rural women network, and we are registered. We are a registered organization. We have been operating for the past 30 years in Trinidad and Tobago. We do have consultative status with the United Nations, committee, the Council, as a matter of fact, for Economic and Social Development. And we normally are associated with Latin America and the Caribbean. But the Caribbean is always lost. And this is why I'm asking whether or not you have a representative here that we can interact with, or would you be interested in having someone in Trinidad and Tobago or representing not only Trinidad and Tobago, but the wider Caribbean?
Sorry, so Gia, at the moment, the thing is that through the Restore Her Rights initiative, you can actually register from our website. So yeah, and because this is a community of practice, right? So you can register to be part of the initiative as well, and we will follow up through that initiative, through our emails and through a lot of our social media channels. So yeah, that I hope that answers your question, but we can come to that later as well. We can speak later on that as well. But we have a few more questions from our audience. I think Henry had a question. So what has been your maybe this can be answered by Marlene or by Cindy, but I would like to throw this to both of you. So what has been your experience in assessing gender-based violence or sexual and gender-based violence intersecting with ecosystem restoration? And how does the status of women, Indigenous peoples exacerbate that situation? Do you have any insights on this?
Did you want me to come in, Rubina?
Yeah, that'd be really great. Marlene, please take it away.
Okay, yeah, well, just to say, I mean, this is something that has, that comes up, that has come up obviously, and for example, in the research that I shared as well, where if you have forums like safe spaces where people can, women can express their experiences, that's an issue that does, that can come up depending on the context. And then, I mean, I think the reality is most of those restoration, at least the projects, are not necessarily, they don't have the expertise necessarily to deal with that. So one very important recommendation is always to be able to bring people to the right resources. There are you can of course provide some recommendations and some links basically to what would be appropriate resources to support that. But I mean, it's also for projects that the risk is exacerbating tensions. And I think that links into a question that was below as well around, how does projects, whether or not they're intentionally working on gender issues and addressing inequalities, can exacerbate inequalities, and that can have or can also, even in closing sometimes or moving towards more equitable situations can cause tensions within communities. So there has to be mechanisms, and that also speaks to the safeguards aspect of that framework that I shared earlier. There have to be mechanisms that can allow those to be picked up and addressed. But my sense is always, don't, like, a lot of those, what I was presenting, and I love your presentation, Cindy, because it's a totally different entry point. You're really talking about working from the grassroots with the communities, and I'm really trying to influence these big projects that are coming in that don't even, it's I think an interesting to see those side by side. But just to say, in those kinds of big projects where really they're not necessarily designed like as people-centered projects even to begin with, there's often not the capacity there to deal with that. And so really bringing in capacity, I think, is a really, really critical aspect, and not just having, those who are perhaps not equipped to deal with those issues try to deal with them. And then those referral mechanisms are very important. And then a lot of community, of course, it's all about the community and how the community wishes to address some of these aspects as well, by creating the right kinds of spaces where women can also have a say and a word and a voice in how that happens is really critical. But I'll turn it over to Cindy, because I think this is also really coming from the community, the grassroots perspective, a really relevant issue.
Thanks, Marlene. I would like to add something here, but I would like to also listen to Cindy first. Cindy, you want to go?
Yeah, I think I just come up with my experience, maybe working with the women in rural area. I think the most important part is really on translating what is gender-based violence is to the community itself, especially when we discuss with the women's group, when we discuss with the communities. It's very difficult to really translate this like global terminologies and really need to really coming up with the community's experience itself, like asking on the comfortabilities of the community when they want to share their experience, when they want to share their perspective, and trying to make a consensus among the communities and the participants of the discussion, for instance. But in the other side, I think in our perspective as the project implementer, maybe something like that, we need to also to create kind of safe space, if I can say, for the, as you said, Marlene, also safe space for this woman, not only woman, but as I said, the intersectionality would be very important there. So there are so many variety of contexts in the community itself that not only applied for women, but also maybe for youth, for instance, that they might not be able to express what they feel and what do they want to contribute. And sometimes it's very difficult for us also to, catching all of the information we needed, maybe to kind of really create inclusive project, for instance, like in restoration or conservations. So what if I can say from my experience is really the most important part is really to translate this gender-based violence through their experience and kind of create safe space and consensus with the community itself. Because if we talk about that, I think in the context of intersectionality with Indigenous women, for instance, it's gonna be very difficult between Indigenous women and women in rural area, and women in other ecosystem and other landscapes perspective. That would be very different in each context. So I think really we need to really coming up with from the local perspective first.
Marlene, you want to go? I saw you raise your hand.
Well, yeah, maybe just one last thought on that is, I mean, I also think where like restoration projects can also make a difference is, just the supporting women's collective, like women associating with each other. So creating those spaces or opening an opportunity for those spaces, and also supporting the collective, because a lot of, even when issues come up around gender-based violence, a lot of times it's women who support each other and who, by strengthening the collective and the strength of the group, that's really, so much goes through that, so much change and so much, that's really such a central part of, all these questions on empowerment and whatever. I think a lot of it is through those collective, those relationships among women.
I agree, and thank you so much for those insights. And that's the thing about like gender-based violence, and especially in like any kind of project or initiatives, right? It's something that's so crucial, but something that's completely missed out at times. And personal experience as well, because I've worked in that space. The idea of safe spaces and the fight for that is a whole another mountain to sort of conquer, right? A lot of the times, if for example, like I have had experience working with the government here, and how they look at if you go to like rural villages in Nepal, gender-based violence or even like any kind of violence against women, it's normalized. So that's something that we miss out on, right? The normalization of violence, like as if it just happens, and the idea is that if you go and if you report it, if you have good referral systems as well, the first point of referral is always mediation, and that becomes a problem, right? So these are like certain components, certain barriers that we have to sort of navigate. And like Marlene said, and of course, like Cindy said, right, like having those connections with each other and building that partnerships with women is so, so important. And I think that's like one of the biggest strength that we have is women supporting each other, right? So I think we have like a lot more questions. I think the conversation is so interesting. Before I come to you, Narcissa, may I ask, may I sort of go to David one more time? I think he's had a question here for a while. So David asks, how do we ensure we empower women in the restoration initiative in communities where access to resources is skewed, right, towards the men? Traditionally. So, but without destabilizing traditional ways of the community. So that's a very interesting question. Anyone would like to, it can be Cindy or Marlene, please take it away. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a hard question because it's hard. It's also need time to answer the question. In my experience, I mean, like my organizations at the moment, when firstly working with the NGOs, and they have been working with the community for more than in 20 years, and we cannot find a concrete answer for this. But again, I think I mean, like the most important part is back to the first answer, as we said. It's we need to kind of passionately working with the community, especially with the women group, to kind of navigate the kind of power relation as well in the communities, because that's the important part as well, to not to not kind of enabling eliticity, something like that, in the community. It's not really, it's not easy to do. It's very hard. It's a very hard work, but really coming up with the process of openness with the community itself, and started from what they need. I think we need to coming first to what they need as a group or as a communities, and trying to understand the situation, because as I said, it always depend on the context and the situation in the grassroots level. Like in Indonesia, there are so many cases when traditional knowledge that, or like practices in the community, is very not gender responsive, if you understand what I mean. Like even here, like in other places in the Lesser Sunda Island, there are so many women are, is what is it? They are being stolen by the men, and forced to marry with them for the sake of the the customary law that applied there. Of course, it's gender-based violence, right? And it's not easy to make them understand. So we need to, I really interested with someone's writing in the chat box, is that we also need to engage men in this process. It's not, we cannot talking about gender-based violence, especially gender-based violence if we also do not see the diversity of the actors itself in the community level. And then slow but sure, but we also need to ensure every single capacity building is really coming up from their own necessaries in the grassroots level, because what we want to see is the sustainability of the impact, not only kind of a project based, like we coming up with a project and we want to see something that's not going to work. It's a very long-term process to see change in the communities. And of course, to make it understand that also when we talk about traditional practices or customary law, it's also very open to be modified as long as the communities are willing to do it and consent to do it. And when they also understand that what the modification is not kind of contradicted with their basic kind of principle, something like that, in their customary law or in their governance system. So yeah, that's what I can share, I think, from my experience in the past.
Thanks, Cindy. Marlon, you have anything? Do you would like to add anything?
Yeah, no, I think I totally agree. And about the engaging men, I mean, when I put here, there's a lot of work around engaging men. Like there's more and more also, yeah, in that what I was thinking of was a lot of work that we also do, and perhaps you as well, Cindy, but it's around opening up some of those questions around norms, but it's very much the communities that lead that reflection, so it can be that reflection is introduced it can be as part of a project on restoration or any other project or any other initiative. It doesn't have to be a project per se, but then the communities are the ones to think through these aspects themselves and to come up with their own vision of what is going to improve their well-being, and kind of also dismantle some of the ideas around, oh well, if a woman has a bit has more power, a man has less power. Like you open up and critically consider some of the norms that shape those relationships. So I think that's really critical, and it's not only up to women to gender inequality is not up to women to solve single-handedly. That is for sure. So bringing in that aspect of normative change, but very much, I think, as Cindy said, like driven also by the community and challenging the idea that tradition is not always, we're always trying to improve ourselves as societies. So tradition also has to be open to, it's a path, it's a pathway, but it's not it has to be flexible, and the world is also changing, so that's just a reality. Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you, Marlene. I agree. And no, that's the thing, right? When you're sort of challenging these traditional social norms, there's always going to be pushback, right? And it's not going to be easy, but it's also about, a slow and steady sort of race, I guess, against time, of course. And then it's also about the practice that we work on, right? And it's a lot of sensitization and a lot of awareness that happens over time. And I think we get there, but it's a very, very slow process. And of course, I think throughout this, I also feel like we also need to discuss about like things like behavior change and the knowledge, attitudes, and practices, and all of that sort of comes into discussion and comes into play as well. But I'm digressing here, and I would like to go to 𝗙ecie𝗹𝗹𝗶. Sorry if I'm pronouncing your name wrong, but I know you had a question. You've been raising your hand for a while now. Please let us know what your question is. Take it away. I'm not sure if he's there, but yeah, Henry, do you want to ask your question? Oh, there
Oui,
you
je
go.
suis là. Bonjour à tout le monde. Je suis Madame Narcisse de l'organisation Talent des femmes autochtones et rurales en RDC. Je voulais seulement partager une petite expérience par rapport à l'approche cartographie en RDC et avec les femmes autochtones aussi. et les défis que nous avons rencontrés pendant cette activité. C'est-à-dire les défis que nous avons rencontrés, nous, on a commencé la cartographie pour accompagner les femmes autochtones. Mais certains défis qu'on a pu rencontrer, c'est par rapport à l'engagement des femmes et qui a semblé amener le processus dans un échec. Parce que quand on a lancé le processus, on a reçu 6 communautés qui se sont enregistrées et qui avaient besoin d'être accompagnées. Mais quand on évolue avec le processus, on a trouvé que 5 communautés se sont retirées et on a réussi à cartographier ne fût-ce qu'une communauté. Et quelle a été la cause ou soit les motifs de ces désengagements? Les motifs étaient que les communautés, les autres communautés se sont demandées, mais c'est vrai, nous sommes prêtes à se faire accompagner et à sécuriser nos terres. Mais le défi qui s'observe en est que vous savez que nous vivons de nos forêts. Mais vous commencez avec la sécurisation au lieu de commencer avec les actions sociales ou soit des actions qui peuvent aider les femmes ou soit les communautés à bien vivre les actions sociales comme telles, vous passez directement à la cartographie. Est-ce que quand nos forêts seront sécurisées, où est-ce qu'on va tirer nos médicaments? Où est-ce qu'on va tirer nos nourritures? Comment est-ce qu'on va prendre en charge nos familles? Nous souhaiterions à ce que si vous nous sensibilisez à sécuriser nos forêts, ça serait mieux de commencer peut-être avec les activités sociales pour assurer nos bien-être avant d'entamer la cartographie. Et ça, on a trouvé que c'était un défi. Et surtout, les femmes ont beaucoup plaidé comme quoi, vous voyez, quand vous cartographiez nos forêts comme ça, au moment où nous dépendons de ces forêts, nous risquons encore d'être victimes des violences conjugales, des violences domestiques, d'aide au ménage, parce que tous les charges nous reviennent, nous, en tant que femmes et nos enfants. Donc, c'est bien de nous accompagner, mais de penser, pendant l'approche cartographique, de penser d'abord aux activités là socio-économiques et aux activités là sociales. Domestiquer peut-être les plantes médicinales, penser d'abord à l'agriculture et tout consort pour que nous puissions aussi adhérer à l'approche. Merci. Je suis 𝗺𝗱 de la RDC, talent des femmes autochtones et rurales. C'est ça l'expérience que je voulais partager et aussi parler de ce qu'on a rencontré pendant l'activité cartographique avec les femmes. Merci.
Thank you so much, 𝗺𝗱, and yeah, I agree, right? Before actually sort of engaging with the community members and especially engaging with women, we cannot just go and sort of present ourselves there. Do we have any insights from our panelists on why that went wrong, or what can be done to sort of avoid the situation again? Yeah. If not, then we can also go to another question. That's okay. I think, Henry, would you like to ask your question again?
Yeah, hi, good evening from the Philippines. I'm Henry. Well, I just want to push back with the comments a while ago in terms of the access and benefit sharing.
Hi, Henry.
Yeah,
would you like to go? I know you have your hand raised.
Hi, yes. Hello.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, yeah, I just want to push back a little bit because a while ago, someone had mentioned about the implementation of the CBD, because in the Philippines, we are implementing the access and benefit sharing, wherein me as a gender lead, I always ensure that women are very strong in terms of the negotiations with the mutually agreed terms. Well, we call it the EBS agreement. So what we did was actually, well, coming from our experience in implementing the access and benefit sharing, is that we actually form a committee of women who could negotiate certain benefits coming from the private sector and coming from the research institutions in implementing or in accessing the resources, as well as getting the benefits coming from the research, from the biological resources coming from these IPLCs. So what we did was actually we capacitate the women's group to lead in terms of the negotiation. And it happens and it turned out that they really have a very strong sense in terms of putting certain percentage of the benefits and their mutually agreed terms. Actually, it's around 15 to 20% that should go to women's needs. So these are very explicit and the mutually agreed terms with these private sector research institutions, as well as anyone who is actually accessing the biological and genetic materials coming from the communities. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Henry. Thank you so much for the insight. So I think, most of our questions are gone. I think we've answered most of the questions. Is there any other questions anybody would like to add to that? Any insights from Cindy and Marlene on what Henry had to sort of share with us as well? Oh, I see Tina's hand up. Yeah, hi, please.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much. No, just kind of following up from Henry's sharing. And Henry, thank you so very much, because I think it's really very helpful if more organizations and agencies do share, because one of the gap, I would say, and correct me if I'm wrong, is usually that the process of how women or women's organizations are engaged in these national processes or consultations is very limited, right? And I think we never really know how the engagement is taking place or where. And it's fantastic to note that in the Philippines, it has taken place, and it is something that would be found wonderful to also have other parties listen to that and also do a similar thing. Now, regarding on the global scale, on what you talked about, the Nagoya Protocol and the mutually agreed terms, I think the issue there, once again, is that though the national discussions are taking place, consultations, one thing becomes really very important. If, say, for example, if you have brought out some recommendations from those consultations, then the process would be wonderful to know how and in what values those recommendations are put forward within the, say, for example, the NBSAP, right? The National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plans, because that is a key document that is used for the monitoring of the implementation of the KMGBF and the monitoring framework. So I think this is where we're talking about, there are these gaps. There's some wonderful work happening, but then how do you really show that the synergies are taking place, right? So the consultations is taking place on that one, and but I would not be, do correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think so in the NBSAP of the Philippines, especially in the discussion around Nagoya or DSI or benefit sharing, if there is a provision that has been put forward there that is responding to the consultations that took place. If it has, it'll be a wonderful experience to also share, which will also be helpful for us, because there will be a review of the Gender Plan of Action next year to also reflect on some of that. But that's what we see as a big gap, is that in the commitment, the strategies that governments are presenting, we really don't see much of this gender component within the strategies and actions that parties are proposing for different elements of the KMGBF. So I will leave it at that, and hopefully that's helpful. But it'll be wonderful. Please do reach out to us. We are collecting and gathering some good practices. It's always very good to have those to also share for the upcoming meetings. So thank you so very much for sharing that.
Thank you so much, Tina. Thank you so much for sort of walking us through that as well. So I think, we answered a lot of questions. There's something that I would also like to add to the earlier question that Henry had on, gender-based violence and sexual and gender-based violence, especially if it's pertaining to the status of Indigenous people as well. A lot of the times, like Marlene said, and of course, like Cindy said, we need to have good referral systems, right? A lot of the times, referral systems, in at least what we need to at least understand with projects, especially, is a lot of the projects focus on prevention, right, of gender-based violence in the first place. But that takes time. You're talking about attitudes, knowledge, practices. You're talking about behavior change. So what we need, of course, is also response systems. And that's something that I think it's coming up now. But how do you establish good response systems? How do you get people to start talking about good responses, right? So there's a project that's now being sort of implemented here in Nepal that talks about gender responsiveness across Nepal, right, in certain areas. So what we can do is, of course, create a community where you have all of your NGOs in place, you have all of your CSOs in place, right? And then you have your police, you have your your judicial systems in place. So making sure that all of these things are in place, and of course have grievance redressal mechanisms created even within projects and also within restoration areas, so that if and when these situations arise, you can actually go and have like a proper system where you can put in your grievances and make it very anonymous, make it safe so that they can actually access this, is something that's, I think, needs to be considered and needs to be sort of thought through. So I hope that makes sense, Henry. And yeah, I think the discussions today was very enriching. If there's any other questions anybody would like to ask, please do use the chat box. Otherwise, should we move towards the closing? Let me know. Any other final thoughts from Cindy and Marlene, please?
No, I just respond to narcissist questions, maybe, yeah. Just based on my experience, I think there are so many methodologies for the community approach regarding, process of discussion and collecting information from the community. But I think in the first place, in my experience, like, we do mix approach, especially when the community and the women group are not easy to like not comfortable to like speak up directly. So we might can use other methodologies to let them like writing, like illustrating, through some tools that we can bring. Maybe if we can find any goods that can illustrate what they're feeling, like maybe fruits or something. There are so many methodologies. But then I think in the first place, we cannot force them to like giving information. Maybe in the other side, they do not understand also what they need to explain, or they do not able to like identifying the problem that they actually face in the grassroots level. So we need to do also consistent observation processes. So that's why I think in the feminist participatory action research, we learned about many stages before we really able to gather informations. But the first phase is really to kind of understanding the situation in the community also, and also gather some information from the key actors that we might can approach in the first place before we really coming up from the main process in collecting their information. I think that's what I can share.
Thank you so much, Cindy. Thank you for those insights. I agree. Before like sort of jumping in and sort of encroaching on their space, it's always good to like have stakeholder consultations, not just one, but have it multiple times. And of course, reach out to like CSOs in the area, because civil society organizations have really, really good reach, right? And a lot of the times, it's not just CSOs, it's also sometimes teachers. You approach them, you approach like people, become community leaders. So get them to sort of navigate the social structures, social norms, and of course, get people together through them. So I agree, like stakeholder consultations are absolutely necessary. So before we move towards the closing, I do have some questions for both of you. I had a question for Marlene. I'm not sure how pertinent it will be considering the range and reach of questions we've had so far. But just to spotlight, right? I understand that your research has taken you to like, many, many places. And it's of course taken you, like you have to work with big, big numbers and big data. And of course, it also talks about, working with like, how do you influence policies or how do you influence projects, right? So what kind of, during your research, like, did you face issues? Because I know that Cindy sort of showed, like, you know, in Indonesia, you started doing like documentation and started documenting things really from the beginning, right? But during your research, Marlon, did you face any issues like that in certain areas or certain parts of the world where you had issues finding like good data on certain, you know, on gender disaggregated data perhaps, and how did that sort of inform your own findings? You know, and can you give like, and perhaps an example of how that impacted your own work?
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I mean, definitely major gaps when it comes to data, and gender disaggregated data is it's a big gap. I mean, a lot of our work, the work I've been doing with colleagues is also, it's about hearing people's experiences and letting people's, how they want to represent their experiences and their priorities and their needs, be surfaced. So I'm a qualitative researcher. I do think mixed methods are really, really important. And I appreciate working also, with people who are more on the quantitative side and being able to see like trends and patterns, but also really understand, like have those be grounded in the experiences of people that, the point is to understand people's experiences and how they want to, what's their self-direction in terms of where they want to go. So that's been very much, the work that I've done personally, but looking also indeed when you're trying to influence policy and so on, there's also, a need for more quantitative data because that resonates strongly as well with policymakers. And so, yeah, there are obviously important gaps there. So one thing we try to do is to influence the type of data that are gathered in different spaces to be more gender responsive and to look at gender issues and to put that in conversation with, for example, some environmental outcomes or biodiversity outcomes, so that, because in terms of influencing policymakers also want to see, it's gender equality, but it's also what does it bring to, a lot of other types of outcomes. So I think those are all the kinds of, it's trying to also, enable a better understanding of all those issues without losing the importance of gender equality in and of itself as an outcome, as it, in its own right, but also trying to deepen that understanding of its relationship to other outcomes. So I don't know if that's answered your question, but that's what I can contribute as an initial thought. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Marlon. Yes, it did answer my question. It also brings me to the fact that, because I am trained in qualitative researchers and I understand what you mean, right? Like when you're talking about policies, when you're talking about negotiating and being part of these negotiations, it's always the numbers people look at, right? Not the narrations, not the narratives or the lived experiences that people have and their worldviews. And it becomes especially difficult, not just for women, but for Indigenous peoples, and especially when you're talking about their traditional knowledge and, sort of intergenerational dialogues that sort of keeps getting overlooked, right? So that's why I wanted to sort of get an understanding of what kind of challenges you faced, right? And with that, I also want to sort of revert to Cindy and ask her, like, what kind of challenges have you faced when you're sort of documenting these processes, right? And asking people to like document it, upload it. So what kind of challenges have you faced, and has it been sort of successful have you been successful in your endeavor, at least in Indonesia?
I think if I can say maybe resource mobilization. Because Indonesia is archipelagic countries, and it's not easy to come up with to come to community landscapes with big resources we need to get as well, many variety of transportation we need to get. But if we talk about practical conditions of documentations of ICCAs, I think it's too kind of, like I said, coming through to like coming from community perspective itself. And when we talk about ICCA, for instance, there are so many misinterpretations that it always have to come up with the conservation as the main outcome. But if we come up with the community perspective on conservation, it's not actually about conservation itself. it's all about community practices. It's about communities, what communities doing, and then also their knowledge in like sustainably utilize their natural resources and utilize their culture, not utilize, but like protecting their cultures. And by then it's also contribute to conservation and restoration, for instance. So it's kind of, the difficulty is really on making us also to be very sensitive in like listening to communities stories and perspective, but in the other side also to make them understand that it is very important also to them to do self-documentation, to make them understand that this is something that very valuable, because we know like in the context of indigenous peoples, mostly their traditional knowledge are not written, right? It's most of them are oral, or oral, delivery oral. So and then the most important part is also to like ensure that the data is not kind of not, but like it's also will be returned to the community, and they are the owner of the data itself. It's not us. We only provide platform. We only help them to like navigate their data, and also increase the feasibility by doing such analysis to like see the statistic and also the percentage of certain areas, something like that. But again, when we talk about data sovereignty, I think that's the one that we need to really ensure that it's there it's there, it's a community on the data, and we ensure the FPIC process, because again, sometimes I think there are so many challenge in the context of FPIC due to insufficient process of dialogue, something like that. So I think that's the main challenge really when we talk about a self-documentation process, because we really do hope that it's not centralized process, it's not NGO-based process, but it's really community-led documentations and self-documentation.
Exactly, and I couldn't agree more, right? So so we need to understand that communities have free, prior informed consent, and that it needs to be, it's theirs, right? It's not just owned by an NGO, and that's really, really great. And I think we're also running out of time. And again, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Marlene and Cindy, and thank you so much, our participants, for this wonderful conversation. And now I would like to invite Rachel for the closing remarks. And yeah, thank you for being such good sports. Thank you.
Hi all, can you hear me? Wonderful. Thank you for the opportunity. I understand we are short on time, so I will keep my comments short. But I wanted the opportunity just to share some of my reflections from the last 90 minutes of discussion. And again, really appreciate the opportunity to learn from you all and be part of this community. So I'm the Climate Change Program Director at 𝗀cie, and we've been working in over 50 countries for over 50 years on securing land rights as a foundational tool for addressing poverty. And more recently, over the past 10 to 15 years, positioning land rights as a tool for promoting climate mitigation and adaptation. And so this discussion was particularly interesting to me, given its relevance to one of our biggest challenges that we face in this arena around the lack of data available on the relationship between women's land rights and positive environmental outcomes. I know we talked a little bit about the power of anecdotes and those narratives that are shared and the case studies that are shared, but often we're finding that funders and government partners do want the numbers, and they want broader sets of quantitative data as well. And so hearing that others are experiencing similar challenges is both encouraging and discouraging, but it's really powerful to be part of this community and to be recognizing the people and the expertise that are driving the environmental change that is often celebrated on global stages, to recognize that environmental health and stewardship is not happening in a vacuum. It is being driven by Indigenous peoples and local communities and their knowledge. So I wanted to highlight very quickly just 3 takeaways that I'm going to have from this discussion. One is an obvious one, that there is a desperate need for more data. And so in all of our capacities, whether we're working at the local grassroots level, the national level, perhaps on nationally determined contributions or adaptation plans, again, at the national level or working across gender action plans for the Rio conventions. It's a real responsibility to contribute to this gender disaggregated data set, acknowledging the role of women in these spaces for ecological restoration. We heard from Cindy around how when you know one community, you really just know one community. And so there is a need for deeper, thoughtful research across the board, and then seeking opportunities to identify trends across those geographies and across cultures. The second piece that I heard a lot is acknowledging the diversity of women. So looking at age, marriage status, disability status, sexuality, Indigenous status, understanding that within this broad group that we are seeking to collect data on, there's also really unique needs, unique skills, unique perspectives, and how can we use the frameworks provided, such as what Marlene had shared, to understand the difference in perceptions and priorities and position both risks for those women, but also the strengths and the opportunities that they present when given proper rights and agency. And finally, just looking forward, how can we apply this data that we are collecting? So how can we be a community to share the research and the data that we have collected in a variety of platforms and mediums? So we saw some frameworks and infographics, we saw research papers, we heard people speaking to global frameworks like the Rio Conventions and national policy initiatives. And so just wanted to bolster that sense of community and how we can come together to share what we do have and strengthen each other's work. I think it's a really powerful platform that Women for Biodiversity is creating. And I'm looking forward to future webinars. And again, just appreciate the opportunity to learn from you all on this one.
Thank you so much, Rachel, for that very astute and very, very sort of well thought out sort of closing remarks. Thank you so much for putting it all together in such, such articulately. And thank you all for being such wonderful participants. And thank you for the very, very nice, sort of engaging conversation. I hope you all enjoyed. And I certainly enjoyed it. I know this is my first webinar with Women for Biodiversity, and I really had a great time, like sort of having this conversation, and I hope to see you in our next. Thank you so much, and see you.
No, sorry, just a minute, Rubina. We need to take a photo first.
Oh yeah, photo. Sorry, we need to take a group photo. Can everybody kindly turn on their cameras? I'm really sorry. But yeah, let's take a picture.
Just a second. I'll just take a picture of the speakers first.
Yeah. Do you want me to? Oh.
No. Okay. Just a second. If the speakers could smile, wait a second. There's something floating in the screen. Yeah. One more. All right. Now with everybody. Wait a second. Sorry, please bear with me.
Oh, it's nice to see everyone together.
Yeah. If everybody can smile. 1, 2, 3. Lovely. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, and we'll see you again. We'll definitely reach out for the next one. Thank you, and good night.
See you
Have a nice day,
again.
everyone.
See you, Tina.
See you.